And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about some work that we've been doing. We've been looking at it for a while. Recently we've got some funding for it with Lido. And yeah, I guess we'll jump straight in. So this is on the economic viability of preconfirmations. Upside down. Oh. Okay, point it over here. I guess it's okay. Oh, that's right. It's like random. If it goes or not. Okay, sweet. So yeah, today I'm going to be presenting on most popular pre-confirmation protocols, classifications, not necessarily the protocols, but the classifications of protocols. I want to identify models for the revenue of each, demonstrate that without pre-confirmation tips, which are a bit of a sort of a thing that we're leaning on a lot, and something that we don't know exactly what they're going to do, but without pre-confirmation tips, we can come up with some pretty strong, like, I guess, accurate models for what we expect the revenue to be for different pre-confirmation protocols. And then, again, it's up to the pre-confirmation protocols to generate the UX and the trust to create pre-confirmation tips that will compensate or potentially just add to the revenue. And then I'm going to discuss some of the trade-offs of each of these protocol classifications that I introduced in this talk. Okay, sweet. So pre-confirmation primer, we probably don't need this, but yeah, pre-confirmation, if you're a proposer for a slot on Ethereum L1, let's just use Ethereum L1 as an example, you have 12 seconds to build a block, but if you want to provide a pre-confirmation, you can sign something that's at any point in that 12 seconds that says, I will execute this in this sequence in the block that I will create, or I will include it in the block that I will create. So something ahead of time that gives you a pre-confirmation before you get the confirmation of the Ethereum L1 block. Okay, so yeah, so this is maybe going to be it's going to ramp up pretty quickly. So to talk about the protocols that I'm going to introduce today, we need three entities. We need to consider three entities. So there's an active proposer. I put active in brackets because the active thing will be important for one of the protocols that I introduce. Just the person who owns the proposal rights for the Ethereum slot. The relayer, again, we know the relayer, the person who's trusted to run the auction, or maybe in the case of mev-commit, the relay committee, or the mev-commit chain, that's like sort of the trusted entity in the middle between the builder and the proposer. And then again, the builder who is building the blocks, or the person that we expect to build the blocks. Again, some protocols for pre-confirmations maybe expect the relayer or the proposer to be providing the pre-confirmations. So we can distinguish that when we get to the specific protocols. Okay. So the three classifications that I'm going to be looking at today, well, there was originally only two, but then I was like, okay, on the airplane, I was like, what can we do with mev-commit? Because mev-commit doesn't really fit into the first two classifications, so I introduced mev-commit as well, and I think I have some reasonably accurate results for mev-commit as well. But the two important ones that I'm going to introduce are independent subslot auctions and dependent subslot auctions. So independent subslot auctions, examples of these are JITO, OP, Superchain, Polygon Proof of Stake, where there is one person in charge of producing multiple blocks or sub-blocks in a row, and they're trusted to run sort of independent mev-boost style auctions every subslot. And dependent subslot auctions, which, again, I'll explain them in detail in a bit, but these are sort of more in line with Justin Drake's gateway proposal, where it's one person providing sort of selective pre-confirmations at sort of subslots throughout a slot. Okay, so independent subslot auctions. At each subslot, the Ethereum proposer runs, again, I mentioned already, trusted to run this independent auction. Let's say there's again, the example of this is Mr. Mev that we've recently published with Lynn, and we've sort of implemented a version of it with Nethermind, where it's like, okay, we split the slot into, let's say, 4 subslots of 3 seconds each. And each 3 seconds, we run mev-boost. So mev-boost, we're assuming that the proposer is pretty low resourced, can't participate in the auction. So we're just running this public auction among builders. And each builder is trying to maximize the value of each sub-block when they're building. So there's no concept of trying to maximize the value of the entire slot, just maximize the value right now of the sub-block that you're building. So dependent subslot auctions. So again, the independent subslot auctions came up first, and then dependent subslot auctions, again, just to compare the two, this sort of dependency. I'll get into it now. So we have this concept of an active proposer, right? So they run the active proposer at any given subslot runs an auction to build a subblock and give the active proposer rights to the winner of the auction. So at the start of the first subslot, the active proposer is the Ethereum proposer, and then at the end of the last subslot, depending on how we implement this dependent subslot auction, if we're able to transfer proposal rights, the active proposer at the last subslot will propose a block, or more realistically, we're going to have to trust that the Ethereum proposer will just publish the sequence of subblocks on behalf of all of the active proposers throughout the slot. And I mentioned it's not properly in use. Again, the example is sort of like the gateway proposal from Justin Drake, but it's probably I know this is probably going to be a bit confusing for people, so it's probably worth just trying to drill down. So there's two ways that we can implement this at a high level. As I mentioned, we can actually transfer the proposer rights at each subslot. How would we do that? We would probably need to have some sort of concept of single-use keys or maybe TEs where we can trustlessly upload a key and then have some function that allows us to transfer the proposer rights to the next signer. Or we can have a trusted auctioneer on behalf of the proposer and the Ethereum proposer and the builders that are participating in the auction. And that gateway, or the trusted auctioneer, will say, okay, you build a subblock. We run this dependent subslot auction. The winner, their subblock gets sort of appended to the sequence that's going to be included in the last block. And then, okay, they don't gain the proposer rights, but they gain the revenue that will be generated in the next dependent subslot auction. So when you win the active proposer rights, the key functionality that we're going to try and capture here is you gain the expected value of the remaining subblocks, of the remaining subslots. And that's going to be the key function, the key sort of property that is going to give us these nice properties that I'm going to introduce later on. So when you become an active proposer, okay, you gain the value of building that subblock, and you also gain the expected value of the remaining subblocks. But then again, you're going to sell, you're going to run another subblock auction in the next subslot and transfer those proposer rights again. But you're going to gain the revenue from that following auction. Okay, so maybe, hopefully some of you caught on with that one, and if not, we can revisit later. Okay. And then mev-commit. So I briefly ran this past Christian this morning. High level, I think this sort of checks out, but there is sort of caveats that they're not necessarily to get into at this point. But we have the Ethereum proposer commits to running mev-boost with a permission set of builders. That's the permission set of builders that are, again, committed to playing with this mev-commit chain. Then the permission builders get to pre-confirm transactions at subblocks throughout the slot. And at each subslot, the builder is sort of running an auction among the set of transactions that are being submitted to the mev-commit chain, deciding which ones I want to include, which ones I not want to include, and sort of building these sublocks throughout the slot. And then at the end of the whole slot, the proposer runs mev-boost among these builders, and only the winning builders' preconfirmations are included on the blockchain. So you have this concept of probabilistic preconfirmations. I guess for more information, we can probably, I'm sure PrimeEv might give us more information throughout the day. But high level, this is the concept. And again, the key part here with the pricing is that there is no obligation for the builders in mev-commit to pre-confirm anything. So they're running sort of a dynamic auction where they're setting their own reserve prices for each of the transactions that are being included and deciding, should I include this or not? Okay, so to be honest, I'm not sure what time I started at. Okay, cool. So for each of these three classifications of protocols, I'm going to derive some results about the expected rewards. I'm going to compare the rewards of running these protocols versus running mev-boost. And in the case, so there's two different ways we're going to do this. For ISSAs, we recently published sort of some results on ISSAs, these independent subslot auctions, which we derived based on simulations using Ethereum L1 like mev-boost data. And then for DSSAs and mev-commit, I'm going to prove the results formally with respect to mev-boost and what the revenues we expect to be. Okay. So current mev-boost, this is a breakdown of the rewards that are currently taking place on mev-boost according to a mixture of Flashbots and Sorella Labs Brontes data. So we have atomic arbitrage, we have sex-dex arbitrage, 24.4%. We have liquidation, sandwiches, complex, which is like a series of NFT mints, and it's basically it's probably just a combination of multiple things here. We have just-in-time sandwiching, which is like a Uniswap v3 or Uniswap v2 strategy where you like provide liquidity just in time, and then before an order and after an order. And then remainder, which is probably more or less, it's just priority fees for user transactions that are not MEV transactions. Okay, so that's the sort of the starting point for this ISSA analysis. Okay, how does our protocol work? Well, the analogy here is like a sink and an overflow system where for each MEV type, so we had this breakdown of what we expect those results to be in a mev-boost block. And then for each of those mev types, we come up with a model for how we expect that mev to grow throughout a sub-block, throughout a slot, right? So with sex-dex, we have this sort of super linear growth. With other examples of mev, we have sort of a linear growth in the value. But we also have this concept of the fee that needs to be paid to capture those things, right? So every time, so when we introduce sub-slots, we will basically just like incrementally increase the value that can be captured at that sub-block, or since the last time the MEV was captured, and then if the value that can be captured since the last attack or the last MEV strategy was executed is greater than the fees that need to be paid, we'll execute that and add the difference between the value that can be captured and the fees to the total rewards, because that's what the proposer will receive. And then we will just reset the timer and go again until we get to the end of the Ethereum slot. Okay. Okay, so I mentioned this sex-dex had this superlinear growth. So we have this superlinear growth in value, and we also, so as soon as it becomes bigger than the fee that needs to be paid to capture sex-dex, we execute it and we add it to the total rewards. So we have this graph of how we expect sex-dex profits to change as we increase the number of splits, which is the number of sub-blocks is splits plus 1. So with 0 splits, which is just current mev-boost, we have this 0.04, which I think earlier on was it 25% of mev-boost rewards. But then as we increase the number of sub-slots, the sex-dex profits we expect to capture through preconfirmations drastically drops off, right? Because of this, like, we're not able to capture this like large growth in sex-dex profits. Plus, every time it does grow greater than the fees, we execute it. So the relative amount of profit that we get is actually significantly reduced. So at the limit, the profits are going to 0 for the proposer. So the proposer, again, everything we're thinking about here is from the perspective of the proposer. Does the proposer want to run preconfirmations or not? Okay, for sandwiches, we assumed a linear growth in sandwiches. We got a little bit of pushback on this, but again, in lieu of anything sort of like clear and definitive, because we were only looking at block data. We weren't looking at mempool data, so we weren't really able to definitively say, this is how sandwiches arrive. We only were able to say, this is how sandwiches arrive on chain. Because we have no access to private mempools where most of the orders are actually happening. So we assume the Poisson in the case of sandwiches, and we come up with, again, similarly as with sex-dex, although the drop-off is less dramatic, it approaches 0. And this trend happens across the board apart from the remainder transactions. Anyway, what we're left with at the end is, if for all of those different types of MEV strategies, we get this sort of summary curve. So the black line is the expected rewards as sub-slots increase, and you'll see that it sort of approaches a limit, where the limit is just the random arrival transactions, the remainder transactions that don't actually change. The profit doesn't change as we increase the number of sub-slots. We still expect the same amount of priority fees to be paid by transactions that aren't capturing MEV. And then the sort of corresponding curve is the amount of tips that we need to compensate for this loss. So we can see that it sort of approaches, I think it's 26%. So that's like a 74% drop off in profits without pre-confirmation tips is the key here. So pretty significant, right? So if you're a proposer and you're the first person to decide, will I run this or not, you're going to be taking a big hit because there's going to be no pre-confirmation tips out there, right? Pre-confirmation tips will have to grow and people have to become comfortable with the fact that they're getting pre-confirmations. So you're immediately going to have to take a big hit and hope that eventually this will pay off. And for the first validator to do this is a big step. Okay. So that was ISSAs. I said I'm going to try and demonstrate some results about DSSAs. So DSSAs are the sort of more sort of the hardest one to grasp, but again, this is the definition from before, so nothing new here. Hopefully you guys still remember it, because I'll keep going. But the key here is active proposer has an auction for someone to build a subblock and then gain the right to be the active proposer from then on. So what is the expected revenue for the Ethereum proposer for running this auction in the first place? Okay. So here's a lemma that lemmas and theorems. DSSAs incentivize a builder to choose a subblock that maximizes the total expected value of the remaining subslots. All right, so that's a key difference compared to ISSAs, right? So basically, you're no longer trying to maximize the pre-confirmation tips that you're receiving in the first subblock. You're trying to choose the pre-confirmations that will maximize the expected value for the entire block, the entire slot. So with this is going to be the key. This is going to be the key functionality that this dependent subslot auction provides us with. That will, again, spoiler, will give us expected revenue that's greater than mev-boost. Okay. So then we have the expected proposed revenue of DSSAs is greater than the expected revenue of mev-boost. Okay, so straight to the spoiler. Without pre-confirmation tips, that's the key, right? So pre-confirmation tips are going to be some additional thing that are going to make it even better to run this type of pre-confirmation protocol if it's possible. So basically, the way we get to this result is pretty trivial. mev-boost is equivalent to pre-confing empty subblocks, and because that is one of the possible strategies, the winning strategy at any given subslot auction has to be that at least that value in expectancy for the winning builder. All right. So with that property in the first auction, all builders can use the build empty subblocks and then run mev-boost, or do something better, right? And the do something better part will give us an expected value that's greater than or equal to running mev-boost. Okay, that's the. Okay, and then the revenue, this is sort of a follow-up result, which is just that DSSAs are running a DSSA for an entire slot is greater than or equal to the revenue of any mixed strategy of the three protocols that we had considered: ISSAs, DSSAs, or mev-boost. Again, from a similar result where at any point in time you can run the maximum of each of those three, which is less than or equal to running the DSSAs. And again, DSSAs. The winner can always run the maximum value strategy at every given point in time. Okay, so then on to mev-commit. So that's nothing new here. This is just a definition from earlier on. So given comparable builder sets, the revenue from the expected proposed revenue from mev-commit is greater than or equal to the expected revenue from mev-boost. Again, without pre-confirmation tips. So comparable builder sets is key here because again, my definition of mev-commit involved the proposer committing to a permission set of builders. So if the builder sets are approximately the same in mev-boost and mev-commit, then again, the mev-commit builders can always run the zero empty subblock strategy, but they can always, so basically that's going to be the minimum that's possible in mev-commit. So any other strategy involving pre-confirmations must be have greater or equal to revenue for the builders, and as such, the proposers, because when we have a competitive auction, the revenue of the proposer will be greater than or equal to the revenue of the highest value builder, or the expected value of the builders. When we're assuming the builders are all sort of heterogeneous or homogeneous, which again is maybe it's definitely a simplifying assumption. So there's definitely some caveats to these results. Okay. So we also proved that the expected revenue of the DSSAs is greater than or equal to the expected revenue of mev-commit without preconfirmation tips. Again, without preconfirmation tips is key here because we don't know what the preconfirmation tips will be. But again, DSSAs are in this sort of optimal zone in terms of preconfirmation protocols, but we'll get to some of the possible drawbacks of DSSAs. Okay, so I'm probably in the way here. So here is sort of a reasonably I guess it's quite subjective sort of view of why preconfirmation protocols and how do we compare, how do we think about these different possible preconfirmation protocols. I also included mev-boost plus inclusion preconfs because I knew that the chain-bound guys would be here today. So actually when I wrote this table first, I didn't have the second row in here. And without the second row, I was like, okay, we have like better revenue in most of these preconfirmation protocols, but every other row makes mev-boost look better, right? So like, why the hell would we run this stuff? But then I realized, okay, we're doing this because we want to provide the functionality of preconfirmations. And that UX, that gain is something that we can't really quantify right now, but it is the thing that will sort of fill the gap, or we hope to fill the gap for the proposers when choosing to run preconfirmation protocols or not. So I've already shown you the revenue stuff. So again, these scales are like relative per row, right? So a 1 on one row and a -1 on another row, like they're hard to compare. But so basically on this top scale, mev-boost is the sort of the equilibrium point. And then we've shown that DSSAs are optimal in this set of protocols. And then mev-boost plus preconfs, or inclusion preconfs, and mev-commit, they're better than mev-boost, but they're worse than DSSAs. And then ISSAs are definitely worse in terms of revenue without the preconfirmation tips. UX, mev-boost plus inclusion preconfs, well, mev-boost is the worst. Mev-boost plus inclusion preconfs is better. And then the other three are execution preconf protocols, so they're the best, relatively. But the gap between these three might not be so big, and maybe it's closer the 0 to the 1s than the -1 to the 0. Anyway, pricing ease, mev-boost is the easiest, and everything else just becomes increasingly harder, right? So ISSAs and mev-boost are effectively the same from a pricing perspective. Mev-boost plus inclusion preconfs, that's probably the same as ISSAs. It probably should be a 1 as well. Then DSSAs and mev-commit are the hardest. They're pretty hard for users to price. Users like can't run, or they're not very familiar with running an auction themselves, which is what's sort of required for these protocols. You need to be a very good pricer or you expect to lose. Trust assumptions, okay, mev-boost is the best. Then we have increasingly worse trust assumptions. Like we're putting more faith in external parties or external committees, or some functionality that allows us to transfer proposal rights, which is, again, pretty high trust assumption. Spam prevention, I didn't know what mev-commit spam prevention functionality was, but I do know that these first three protocols are basically the same spam prevention, and that DSSAs are definitely bad, because like basically having to price every single transaction individually, which is what DSSAs require, and I think what mev-commit requires as well, is quite difficult, right? And then if you're able to just flood the builder or the proposer with pre-confirmation requests, it's basically a attack vector because they can't possibly do everything. So they'll probably just basically get. It's a problem that existed with priority gas auctions before, where like the proposer just can't process everything. So if you flood them, there's a good chance that you get your transactions in. And then centralization. It's related to trust, but it's slightly different, where this also includes like the centralization of the builder market, right? That with these relatively straightforward mev-boost and mev-boost plus preconfs, centralization is still a concern. But on this relative scale, they're the best because they don't really add any centralization. Well, obviously, you can't add more centralization than mev-boost already has. But DSSAs and mev-commit, they are highly centralizing in the builder market. Like, there's probably going to be only one person that's going to be providing these preconfs eventually, and that obviously has very bad effects on the revenue. So, yeah, basically, we need to be very conscious of these two protocols. Although they potentially provide the best UX and higher revenue in theory, in the short term, they may actually hurt revenue long term. So we may want to maybe pick something in the middle like ISSAs. But again, ISSAs have a big revenue jump that needs to be made through the user experience part to compensate for this -1 in terms of the expected revenue that we have here. And I've already basically, sorry, I've talked through these 3 slides, but I have them in here in case we need to go through them again. So yeah, trust, spam prevention, and centralization. It's a complex pricing, additional effective trust third-party permission. So yeah, that's really everything. I guess I probably cut a few corners there. So if you have any questions on any of those protocols or the results, or if you think that some of them are wrong, if you work for any of these mev-commit or chain-bound and you think that you're misrepresented in this table, happy to hear your thoughts. But yeah, thanks very much. Yeah.
Only some transactions actually being in the first slot and the rest of them just being like at the end of the big slot?
So yeah, that's one possible outcome. But this DSSAs include every possible outcome, right? So yes, let's say that's the optimal scenario, right? And then so let's say let's say there's 2 of those builders in the auction. Then from a proposer's perspective, okay, we know that these 2 guys are in there, so they're going to choose they're going to potentially not pre-conf anything. But there could also be some rogue guy in there that may decide to pre-conf more stuff and then think that their expected revenue is higher. So they'll pay higher to win that auction. But yes, I think sort of maybe the pushback on that specific point about pushing all these the high value stuff to the end of the block, that only happens. Yeah, I think it's a very likely scenario if we have very efficient searchers and builders in the market. But there's a good chance that we're probably just going to get people that are going to just yeet into just AMM trades, and they're going to basically just move the prices without allowing time to develop. But these builders will only include those transactions if it's greater than if they think it's greater than expectancy for the entire slot to do those pre-confs instead of not. But yeah, it's
Got it.
totally. Who knows what's going to happen? I don't.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay, I guess that's everything. Thanks very much, and I'll be outside if you want to ask any more questions.